You were held in captivity for 7 days. What is racing through your mind in that moment?
What are my last photos? Did I take any photos worth dying for today?
Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist Lynsey Addario.
Lynsey Addario is among the missing.
They made us lie face down and had us execution style. I remember sort of staring down the barrel of the gun, thinking, no, this isn't really happening.
Lynsey Addario is one of the most renowned photojournalists of our time.
You know, anyone who does this work knows that it comes from a calling, something that if I don't do, I wouldn't be me.
As a young photojournalist, I read Lynsey's book, It's What I Do, A Photographer's Life of Love and War, and would later have the privilege of being her assistant.
There's a narrative that the profession has been dominated by men.
So much is made of you being a woman in the field.
I think it's a superpower just being a woman, mostly surrounded by men, and no one asks them why they're leaving their wife and children at home.
Lynsey, you have a 10-week-old baby. Are you gonna keep doing this?
Do you ask men that question?
How do we all find a husband like Paul? I'm just asking for a friend.
If you want to do this work, you have to make a lot of sacrifices and be very focused. It's not easy. It's hard and it's lonely.
This is Lynsey Addario in the village of Luhansk. We're being shelled.
What keeps drawing you back to the front line?
You don't just see photos, you feel them. And that's what you should be armed with before you even hold a camera.
You kind of disappear down that lens and you're in another world.
A quick note before we dive in. This episode is brought to you in partnership with MPB, who make it easy for storytellers to buy, trade, or sell camera equipment. I've used them myself as a sustainable choice for purchasing kit, like this Nikon FM2. I really recommend checking them out at mpb.com.
Lynsey Addario, welcome to Visionaries.
Hi, Alice.
I have this book. You can see how tattered it is and how bad shape it is. And it changed my life because reading about it inspired me in terms of the career, but it also changed my life because it led me to you. And I will never forget being told that you'd asked for me to come for an interview as your assistant. And I arrived at the door and your lovely husband, Paul, greets me. And I look at him and I think, I know about you and all of Lynsey's ex-lovers. And I walk in and I come for an interview. I was fucking terrified. But we meet and I guess it went well.
Obviously. I mean, you were not only hired, but I begged and pleaded for you to not become as successful as you are.
Yeah, we would have to have a chat a few years later. I was like, Lynsey, I just don't think I have time for this anymore.
Yeah, that was very quick, by the way. I don't think it was a few years.
So preparing for this interview and knowing we were going to speak, I went back to the book, and also knowing that we have just lost a great, amazing photographer, Sebastião Salgado. There's literally a part where I have 10 years ago, when I first read the book, underlined the part about Salgado, and you say, until I saw Salgado's exhibition, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to be a street photographer or a news photographer, or whether I could make it as a photographer at all. Until that exhibit, I hadn't quite known what that was or could be. I hadn't thought of photography as both art and a kind of journalism. How did Sebastião Salgado inspire you? And tell me about the early years of how you even found your path to photojournalism.
I mean, he inspired me in so many ways, primarily in the way he was able to humanize everything he photographed. You know, I think from the Workers series to the migrations, anything he did, even the famine, the subjects were always shot in a very dignified way, very intimately. You got a sense of the people rather than just sort of a photographer swooping in, taking pictures and objectifying people and leaving. I mean, there was a sensitivity to his work. So for me, that was a huge inspiration. And I think as he got older and he started doing more landscapes, more in the Amazon, more closer to home, more climate related, it just showed his versatility to be able to go from these very photojournalistic scenes to more sort of wide landscapes and
the
things.
Genesis work.
Yeah, the Genesis work was unbelievable. And so I think he just kept pushing himself to not only be a photographer and an inspiration for photographers, but also for just people. And then I think with my own path to photojournalism, it was hard. I mean, I never wanted to be a photographer because I wasn't really familiar with what photojournalism was. Like, I didn't understand that you could take these very complex geopolitical issues, humanitarian issues, and actually tell them in stories with photographs. And I know that sounds very naive, but I was raised in a family of hairdressers. We didn't have magazines, newspapers, and books on the table. You know, it was very much sort of me discovering photography as a young woman as I started to photograph more and more.
A huge family, by the way.
Big Italian American family, yes. Everyone's very creative. Everyone's very positive and very sort of open-minded. And that also is a quality that has helped my work, being from a family that's very, non-judgmental. It was very open to anyone who walked in our door.
I read out a quote that you said that it's not just about taking photos, it's not just the photographs, it's about building relationships. Was that always intuitive to you? Like, how did you learn to build the relationships that you do? I've seen it in action. I've seen how you emotionally connect, you build trust, but did you always know how to do that, or was that something you learned?
I think I learned more along the way. I think, because of my upbringing, I'm very comfortable in pretty much any situation. Like, it takes me a lot to make me uncomfortable. So I think people sense that. And I think people sense that I go in with a very open mind and an open heart, and I'm literally just there to tell their story. And I think people appreciate that. But I had to learn patience. Finding my path was really about trial and error and what sort of spoke to me internally, and also sort of where I felt I was thriving. I did street photography. I went back to New York to really sort of learn the craft with mentors at the Associated Press. Worked for 4 years for a news service, for a wire, the Associated Press, and then eventually went back overseas to India. And it was there that I started working in Afghanistan and photographing women living under the Taliban. And I realized how important it was to be a voice for people, not only a visual voice, but also a voice in terms of interviews. And so for me, now what carries through my work is the fact that not only do I photograph, but I do very extensive interviews of most of the people that I photograph.
I know those initial trips were really seminal, that time in India and Afghanistan. Do you remember a moment, an interaction or a photo you took where your world kind of pivoted on an axis and you found your style? You thought, that's what I want to be doing.
I mean, it wasn't one distinct moment. I think it was that early work, I couldn't give that work away, even though there were almost no photographers working in Afghanistan under the Taliban 25 years ago. Because I didn't have a name, I couldn't get the work published. Eventually, the Los Angeles Times published it with a story that Dexter Filkins did. But I think it was after 9/11, when I went back to Afghanistan to photograph the fall of the Taliban in Kandahar, there were moments there where I realized the sort of historical weight of actually bearing witness to the fall of the Taliban, and then going in to cover the war in Iraq, and just being sort of in Baghdad, in Iraq, in those initial months after the fall of Saddam Hussein. And the role of journalists was so fundamental because, we were sold on the necessity of going to war in Iraq because there were weapons of mass destruction. Well, I was one of those very sort of stupid journalists who actually looked for weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist. And so I think it was very important to be on the ground and to document.
So you saw yourself as collecting evidence?
Correct. I mean, very much so. And also sort of as it was clear that the United States had a plan to overthrow Saddam Hussein, there was absolutely no plan for the aftermath. And, I sort of watched the society that was reveling in euphoria when Saddam Hussein fell just fall into complete disarray, and the chaos surrounding the fact that people couldn't get electricity, they couldn't get water, they couldn't get their money out of the banks. Young kids who knew nothing about Islam and knew nothing about the Middle East, putting their guns on children, walking into people's homes in the middle of the night, seeing women unveiled. All of this led to what eventually became the insurgency, disbanding the Iraqi army. And I think that journalism in that moment was very fundamental, as I think it still is in every war.
So post 9/11, Iraq, Afghanistan, what keeps drawing you back to the front line?
I mean, what draws me back is the fact that I believe that people in positions of power need to be held accountable for their decisions. Obviously, most presidents or world leaders can't go to the front line. They can't go into the heart of war. They don't have time to be sitting around gathering stories about what happens to people on the margins of war. And so I think it's important that we provide sort of a mirror to their policies. You know, what is the fallout of their policies? And hold them accountable. Are they working? Are they not working? You know, what are the repercussions?
You gave me this amazing print as a gift, and it's been hanging in my flat for all these years. I'd love for you to tell me about this photo. Where was it taken?
That was in 2004, and that was my first trip into Darfur 21 years ago to cover the war that was going on at that point. And so this was our first trip in. We couldn't get visas to go into Darfur, so we went to Chad and walked a few kilometers through the deserts, through wadis, up to our necks in water, carrying our camera gear over our heads, and then met up with the rebels. These were the SLA, the Sudanese Liberation Army, and traveled around on the back of their truck for a week documenting the crimes against civilians that were happening at that point. The Sudanese government, led by Bashir, was blanket bombing villages, sending Janjaweed, which were Arab nomads on horseback, to pillage those villages, burn houses that still were standing. Many women were sexually assaulted. Most people had everything they owned taken, and there was a mass exodus of people. And that's happening again now.
I wonder, does it become a kind of barrier between you and what you're experiencing, or does it bring things into sharp focus when you're taking that photo? Are you focused on the technicalities of getting the photo, or are you emotionally engaged in what's unfolding in front of you?
It's a combination. I mean, sometimes I use my camera intentionally as a barrier because I'm photographing such emotional moments that I can't sort of bear it in my heart. And so I sort of put my camera up in front of my face so that I have to focus on the technicality of the image. And so that kind of pulls my heart and my head away for a moment, and I'm focusing on, you know, is the image in focus? Is the light okay? Are my exposures okay? What's my composition? Sometimes I'm using the camera just to sort of make pictures and tell stories. But I think when it's a very emotional moment, I'm very conscious of the fact that I have to keep my camera in front of my face almost so I can handle what I'm witnessing.
What is driving you? Like, how do you know which roads to take, which stories to tell? How do you make the decisions that are so crucial to get the stories that you end up getting?
I think there are just certain topics that interest me. You know, I focus a lot on women and children. I focus a lot on humanitarian. I focus a lot on injustices, you know, on the fact that some people live with extreme privilege and some people just simply do not. There should be perspective in the world, and that, you know, we should all be aware of how lucky we are.
So much is made of you being a woman in the field, a female photojournalist. I've heard you talk about it countless times on stage. What are the most annoying questions you get asked? Because one of my favorite responses that you give is, would you ask a man that?
I mean, first of all, we were at a women's conference, so it was pretty stupid to ask like a very sexist question at a women's conference. There were literally 3,000 women in Lincoln Center in the audience. It was a Tina Brown summit, and I had just given birth to Lucas. You know, I was on stage, and the interviewer was asking me, you know, why do I go back to war? And I got so annoyed because obviously I'm in a profession as a war photographer, or as a photographer who often covers conflict, mostly surrounded by men and young men, you know, and men who are strong, and who, many of them have like wives at home and children at home, and they go into the field and go home. And no one asks them why they're leaving their wife and children at home. And so it just gets a little tedious to always be judged for being a woman in the field. And do I struggle with it? Obviously. I mean, is it difficult to leave my kids behind every time I go and not know if I'm going to come back? Obviously. But I mean, that's something that I have to deal with in my own head, and with my husband, and with my children. And it's not easy. But I think to sort of dumb it down and to be accusatory about it, like, how dare you do this? Well, I mean, you know, anyone who does this work knows that it comes from a calling. I mean, it's something that is almost involuntary. You know, it's something that if I don't do, I wouldn't be me, you know? And so it's a struggle.
How do we all find a husband like Paul? Just
go to Sweden.
Asking for a friend. Where did you find
somebody
him?
tells me you have no problem finding partners. I would say go to Scandinavia. It's a very good start. No, I mean, I make those decisions I have to think about, and I have to be much more selective now than I ever was, because, you know, the amount of time I can stay away from my kids and my family is
You have Lucas
very
and Alfie
limited.
now. How old are they
2
now?
kids.
13 and...
Alfred just turned 6.
Wow, I can't believe that.
Yeah, and he's like a real character and larger than life and very attached to me, which is very strange because when Lucas was small, he built in this sort of defense mechanism to like not allow himself to not so much get attached to me, but to just, you know,
prepare for when you would need to
Yeah,
leave.
because I was coming and going since he was 3 months old. And Alfred, even though I've been traveling since he was born, for some reason just will not accept it. I mean, today he asked me if I would open a pancake shop instead of being a photographer because I make really good pancakes and he would prefer that I stay at home. And so it's
You do make really good pancakes. Can I just say that I will never forget one morning coming to your house. You had stepped off the plane from Yemen, I think, around 5 a.m. And I just walk in. I don't know why I remember this. Tell me if it's wrong, but you know, you're not the tallest woman in the world despite being a fucking powerhouse. And you had this little like ladder in the kitchen and you were reaching because you were baking cookies for Lucas. It was like, you're a superhero.
Yeah, I'm like a full-on, like, you know, mom and housewife when I'm home.
How do you spin those plates? How do you do it all?
I mean, look, I fail kind of at everything a little bit. You know, I do the best I can in everything, and I try to be as present as I can be when I come home. That means often getting off the plane, coming home from the airport, rushing to school for a school play, or coming home, making banana bread, making sure dinner's on the table, literally like hours after getting home. The idea is to just be present when I'm home and when I'm at work to try to focus on work.
There's a conversation I'm having with so many women in my life at the moment around this idea of both having it all or a work-life balance. Do you think it's something that you found? Is it possible when you are working as hard as you are and have the success that you have and the drive?
I don't think it's possible to have like a perfect work-life balance. I think that I probably have the best version that I ever imagined possible. You know, when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I had a series of, you know, totally failed relationships. I was always getting cheated on. I would never go home. All I wanted to do was be in the field. And I just reconciled I would be single and that would be fine because I have this amazing job that I love and I was lucky to have that.
So in some ways you were making peace with the idea that you couldn't have it all.
Yeah, I don't know how old you are, but I was definitely like sort of in my late 20s, early 30s. And
31.
Yeah, it was almost exactly at that time. And I was like, okay, it's fine. You know, I have this amazing love for my work and most people can't handle being with a partner who is so driven and so passionate. But that was when I met Paul, and he was running Reuters, and he had, you know, a bureau of 100 people working for him, and he was equally as passionate about his work. And so he never made demands on me to sort of hurry up, come home, do this. It got complicated when we had children, obviously, because that's where the balance really is a struggle. Because, you know, as your children get older, they need you more, ironically. When Lucas was very young, I sort of said to myself, okay, well, he probably won't remember anything until he's 3 or 4, so I can keep traveling. But I think, you know, now he's a teenager, and it's important that I'm home. And so I'm constantly struggling with being away and being home and feeling like I'm kind of failing a little bit at everything.
What was different about Paul on an emotional level? Is it that he didn't ask you to make
a choice,
sacrifices or a choice? How was it different when you met him? How was it different from your past partners?
My past partners, it was always your career or me, you know. But I think that that speaks to like the type of men I was dating, you know, and I think obviously I was not choosing very healthy partners, you know. And
they stay in the book.
Yeah, they're in the book. And I think when I met Paul, it wasn't that he didn't ask anything of me. And certainly as we get older, he asks a lot still. There have been points in our relationship where if you don't reel me in, I'll just keep going on assignment back to back because that's like my happy place. And so, you know, there have been times where he's like, okay, enough. Like, I need you home. The kids need you home. You've got to like tone it down.
There are boundaries.
Yeah.
You describe it as your happy place. Why? Describe it to me.
It's so hard to describe. I feel like I am where I belong. I feel like I'm meeting people and interviewing them and feeling sort of in my heart and soul, I am where I need to be, and I'm telling the stories that need to be told. I love the anonymity of being in these places. I love being fully present. It's sort of one of the only places in my life where I am fully present in the now. You know, when I'm home, I've got my phone, I've got emails, I'm trying to cook, I'm trying to, you know, go to Alfie's soccer games and never actually making it. I'm trying to edit stories, prepare for the next story. And so everything is kind of this very stressful blur. Whereas when I'm in the field, I have a finite amount of time to tell a story and I'm focused.
So you are sort of running towards danger often when other people might be running the opposite direction. In 2022, I think there was an extraordinary image that you took of a family. You yourself narrowly sort of missed death in that moment. Can you describe that photo and the moments leading up to it and after?
I had been in Ukraine at that point for almost a month because I got there before the invasion started. I was working a lot in the gray zone and in Donbass in the east, and then pulled back to Kiev when the full-scale invasion started. And it was during the time that Bucha was encircled and by Russian forces. And so there was an exodus of civilians fleeing from across the Irpin Bridge, which had been intentionally broken by Ukrainian forces to slow the Russian advance. And so we went to that area and there were just like dozens of people coming out, you know, this was like at dawn on a Sunday. I, in my head, thought, okay, this is a known civilian evacuation route. Putin is saying he absolutely does not target civilians. It was still early on in the war. I was obviously very naive, and I believed that his soldiers would not target a civilian evacuation route. So we were there, obviously with body armor and very sort of aware of where we were, that the Russian forces were very close by, shooting. And then suddenly a mortar round came in, and it was, I don't know, a few hundred meters in the distance, but kind of off to the side. And my security advisor, Steve Bungay, said, do you want to leave? And I said, no, they know that this is like civilian evacuation route. It's fine.
So at that point, your security advisor is saying to you, are you comfortable? He's not saying we need to leave. He's
he's a great security advisor. So he's not one of those guys who just like says we need to leave right this second. I mean, it was still, you know, especially dealing with mortars and artillery, they bracket onto things often. So you have to kind of see how the strikes are going. And so
it sounds in a distance at that point.
Yeah, it was like a little bit in the distance, not very far in the distance, but it was enough. And we also had this sort of cement, it was weird. It was almost like a cubby or like a wall that was being built that I felt like would protect us from shrapnel. So we had a little bit of cover. So I kept shooting, and then another round came in, and it came in closer. And I dove down to the ground. At that point, I realized they were getting closer. And then I popped back up, and another round came in, like literally in quick succession, probably 20 meters from us. And it hit the road in front of us. I saw a huge flash, and it was very loud. And so I had dove to the ground, and when I popped back up, everything was dusty. It was complete chaos. And it's also very loud. And Andriy Dubchak, who is a Ukrainian videographer, journalist, very like reputable, very well known, he was working with me in those days. And he said, you know, he was filming. I didn't realize he was filming. And I looked at him and I felt that I had shrapnel hit my neck. And so I'm saying to him, am I bleeding? And we sort of look each other over to make sure we're okay. And then Steve tells us to stay where we were, and he runs across the street. And it didn't dawn on me that that I thought maybe a soldier had been hit because soldiers were helping civilians across the street. And so we had to stay put. And when we were finally told we can go across the street, I ran across the street and came upon these bodies, which were clearly children. I wasn't mentally prepared for that. I kind of was assuming we'd come upon soldiers or destruction or, And so I paused and there was still shelling coming in. And so I thought, we have to run. And then I thought, no, actually, like, this is really important. And so maybe my younger self would have run because I would have been thinking about my life. But for me, it was like, I have to take this picture. And so I'm shooting and I'm like kind of working my way around the scene, trying to find an angle that was respectful and maybe not show the faces or maybe, just something that didn't feel like it was disrespectful to the victims. And so we also didn't know if they were alive still. And so I was shooting and Steve's like, you have to be quick. And so almost immediately we just ran and we sort of made a run for it. And 2 more rounds came in very close as we were running away. We had to keep diving into the woods off the path. In those moments, you're in a sort of state of shock. I still didn't even know if I had taken a picture, if I had gotten a picture, if it was in focus, what I had actually witnessed.
So at that moment, you didn't know the impact of that image that you'd taken?
No, of course not. I mean, you don't really know anything because it's like you're sort of operating on full adrenaline, using whatever skills you have to just hold it together. And so then we got in the car and I looked on the back of my camera and I just thought, looks like it's in focus. I wasn't even really thinking, because I also couldn't tell. And then it wasn't until I got back to the hotel in Kiev where I got a message from my friend Clarissa Ward, who's a CNN
amazing
journalist. Yeah, amazing. And she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why?" And she said, "You had a really close call." And I said, "How do you know that?" And she said, well, Andre was filming and uploaded the whole thing to Facebook. And my heart stopped because, of course, I thought, oh my God, my husband's going to see, my family's going to see. Because when I'm in a war zone, I don't tell anyone what's going on. Like, of course, I don't tell Paul if I have a close call until I'm safe,
I've seen that footage and it's one of the few times I have seen fear in your eyes, genuinely.
Yeah.
I mean, how does it feel for you to watch?
Yeah, it's still very hard to watch. Yeah.
You've had multiple close calls. That kind of comes with the territory of the job. You were kidnapped in 2011. Can you tell me what happened?
Visionaries is all about celebrating and supporting storytellers, which is why I'm so excited to be working with MPB, who make it easy to buy, trade, or sell camera gear. I've used MPB myself, not only to buy kit like this Nikon FM2, but to pass on the cameras that I no longer need so that other storytellers can keep creating. It's a really affordable and sustainable way to access the tools that help us to tell the stories that matter. Take a look at npb.com.
In 2011, I wanted to cover the Arab Spring. I actually had been in Iraq when Egypt was happening, when Mubarak was overthrown. And so I wanted to go to Libya. And the only way into Libya at that point was to go illegally through Egypt. All of the journalists covering the popular uprising in eastern Libya had gone in through Egypt without visas, without Libyan visas. It was the only way to cover the rebel movement. And so we went in and none of us thought it would actually be violent because actually Egypt wasn't really violent. I mean, it wasn't like a frontline scenario.
What was happening on the ground?
On the ground, there was this sort of fledgling rebel movement in eastern Libya, in Benghazi. People were like forming a parallel government. They were really excited. They were having demonstrations. I think it was February maybe 24th where there was a call to arms and they decided like all men of fighting age would move forward along the front line. And so at that point, we went with them, obviously, because photographers, we have to physically be there on the front line. And so we moved forward, but really didn't realize like that they had no fighting experience. I mean, not only did they have very little fighting experience, but they had AK-47s and Gaddafi's military had helicopter gunships, was doing airstrikes with the sort of dumb bombs just landing all around us, tank rounds, snipers when they got close enough. It was just nonstop sort of barrage for several weeks. And extremely dangerous. We were in the desert, which is flat terrain. There was nowhere to hide when the front line came in. When Gaddafi's troops came close enough, you basically made a run for it and hoped you didn't get killed.
And at the time, you're with a group of other journalists, right?
I covered the front line with sort of a pack of us. There was just a bunch of us. And obviously, logistically, there was, everything was shut down in eastern Libya. So one night we finally found a hotel that was open near the front line. And at 2 a.m, we were woken up by the hotel staff saying Gaddafi's troops are coming, get out. So then we left, and some families opened their homes to us, literally gave us the keys to their houses and fed us every day. I mean, it was extraordinary. On March 15th, 2011, we were working in the town of Aedy. It was on the front line. It was very clear that Gaddafi's troops were moving in. They were dropping leaflets from the sky saying, we are overtaking this village, so if you're a civilian, get out. And it was really the first time we saw civilians fleeing. Most civilians had just stayed in their houses or had long ago left. At that point, I was working with Tyler Hicks, and that morning, Steve Farrell and Anthony Shadid came in from Benghazi to join us. So there were 4 of us. And we were in 2 vehicles. That's something that you do in a war zone, just so you have 2 cars in case one breaks down. And as the front line was moving closer and closer, suddenly the driver of Steve and Anthony's car quit because his brother was shot at the front line. His brother was fighting and was shot.
So he's in a state of panic.
He's in a state of panic. He literally pulls over, pulls back to the residential area where we have a little cover from buildings, dumps everything Steve and Anthony own on the side of the road, and says, I quit, my brother was just shot. And suddenly we have 1 vehicle and 5 of us, because we have the driver, Mohammed, and 4 of us. And Steve and Anthony and Tyler are big guys. And so we're literally like slammed in the car with all of our bags, all of our gear. And now there are 4 journalists trying to make a decision of like how to cover this shifting front line. And of course, we all have very different needs. I, for whatever reason that morning, was convinced that we were going to get kidnapped. I was sure that something bad was going to happen. I had this horrible premonition, so much so that a few days before I had given a hard drive of all my work away to Brian Denton and said, if I get killed, make sure my work survives. And so that morning when the driver quit, everyone was like, let's go to the hospital. So we went to the hospital. We're counting like civilian casualties, whatever. I'm in like a sheer panic because I'm like, we have to get out of here.
Your instinct is telling you.
Yeah. But of course, as the only woman, I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to sound like a woman. So I just sort of kept my mouth shut and was like, this is really stupid. Everyone's leaving. We should leave. And at that point, I'm standing in front of the hospital because Tyler, who's staff with the New York Times, was inside shooting. And I'm not going to go in and shoot the same thing as him. So I was sort of waiting outside the hospital. And I was standing with Laurent van der Stock, who's a very well-known French war photographer who has been shot. He's been through everything. And he looks at me and he says, it's time to go, we're leaving. And I looked at him and said, Laurent, you're French. And French have like the reputation of always being the last ones to leave. I was like, Laurent, you're French. If you leave, I'm going to die. Please don't leave. And I was literally like laughing with him, like we have to leave. And I couldn't say anything because the guys I was with still wanted to stay.
So you watched him leave?
I watched him leave.
But you stay?
In a sheer panic. Well, I was with, I couldn't leave. I was with my team. And so anyway, they came out. The guys wanted to go back to the front line to keep shooting. At that point, I was sort of just paralyzed by fear. We went back to the front line. Our driver, Mohammed, was getting calls from his brother, who was working with the BBC, that Gaddafi's troops had moved into the city, that we had to leave. There were snipers. Mohammed was panicking. Finally, by the time we made a decision to leave, it was too late. Gaddafi's troops had flanked the desert and came from the side and cut the road in front of us. And we drove sort of directly into one of his soldiers' checkpoints. It was chaos. Everyone was screaming, stop the car, keep driving, move ahead. It was like complete chaos. Mohammed, who was, I think he was just 21, panicked, and he stopped the car and jumped out and said, we're journalists. He jumped out to the left. I was sitting behind Mohammed. Tyler, Anthony, and Steve were ripped out of the car on the right-hand side. And I, as the only woman, I'd been kidnapped also in Iraq, and they always leave me in the car because I think they never really know what to do with a woman. And so I was sort of sitting in the car watching my colleagues to the right, like, fight for their lives. Muhammad, I actually saw him go out to the left, but didn't see him again. And then suddenly the rebels that we were with started opening fire on the checkpoint full of Gaddafi's soldiers. So we were in this sort of like wall of bullets. There was all this crossfire, and we were not in an armored vehicle. And so I was like sitting in the back of the car thinking, you know, shit, I've got to make a decision, you know? And so I decided not to go out on the left side because my colleagues were on the right, and I saw a building, like a stone building that was like a police checkpoint, where I thought I can get cover from the bullets. So I crawled across the back seat of the car and I jumped out, and there was one of Gaddafi's guys like grabbed my cameras, which I had obviously around my neck. And I very stupidly am like pulling back, and then there are bullets like zoom, zoom, you know, going past my head. And I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing? And so I just like let go of my cameras and ran for that building. And I got to the other side of the building, and all the soldiers were like, you know, adrenaline ramped, and they were like, lie, you know, give us your passports in Arabic, Jawaz. And so we gave our passports, and then they were like, why do you know Arabic? You must be spies. And so then we were like, no, we've just been working in the Middle East for, you know, however many years. And so then they made us lie face down in the dirt and had us execution style. And each one of us had a gun put to our heads. And I remember sort of staring down the barrel of the gun thinking, no, this isn't really happening. And then I look to my right and I see Anthony, Steve, and Tyler all just sort of like begging for their lives.
You had the gun towards, not the back of your head.
No, front. I'm like staring at the barrel of the gun. Yeah, no, they have us like they're going to kill us.
What is racing through your mind in that moment?
I can't believe I'm going to die in a place like Ajdabia. What is my grandmother going to think? What's Paul going to think? What are my parents going to think? What are my last photos? Did I take any photos worth dying for today? Like, you know, I mean, it's totally a series of like, will I ever see my cameras again? Of course, I was thinking about my cameras. And then the commander came over and said something in Arabic that Anthony Shadid later translated, because he spoke Arabic, as you can't kill them, they're American. And we have no idea why they said that, because most people in the Middle East want to kill Americans. So they didn't kill us. Instead, they tied us up, tied my hands behind my back, my ankles together with my shoelaces, and then put us in vehicles on the front line. Where they literally left us tied up and laughed at us as like bombs and bullets kind of rained around us for hours.
Are you in shock? Are you furious?
First few moments I was like, you never know what's going to happen. I mean, as I said before, I was taken in Iraq, and you're completely at their mercy. So there's like nothing you can do is just like sit there and kind of pray if you're religious or hope that, you know, you survive. So I was just sort of sitting in the back of the car and like trying to gauge like all the incoming fire, but you can't move because we were like tied up in the back of this car on the front line. Like they literally put us on the front line just to like, you know, play Russian roulette with us. And then a soldier came up next to me, a Libyan, and I thought he was going to bring me water, because in Iraq, actually, they gave me water as, you know, a woman. And he sort of sidled up next to me and he punched me square in the face. And I thought, what a dick. Like, how can you punch a woman that's tied up, like square in the face, you know? And so I just looked at him and I just put my head down and started crying. And then another soldier came over and put a cell phone to my ear, and it was his wife saying, you are a dog, you are a donkey. And I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing. Literally, like, all of these things. And then,
what?
Yeah, and then Steve, and I was like, no, I'm a journalist. I'm with the New York Times. She was like, you are a donkey. I'm like, I'm a journalist. And so it was like literally going nowhere. And then Steve was put in the vehicle next to me. Anthony and Tyler were put in another vehicle. They left us there for hours. Eventually, they let us lie beneath a truck for cover. And then someone must have said, like, don't let them die, because eventually at night, they moved us to another position. And like, essentially, we were beaten up repeatedly, tied up, blindfolded, threatened with execution. I was, as the only woman, I was groped basically by every man I came across. And Tyler, Steve, and Anthony were sort of smashed with gun butts all the time.
You were held in captivity for 7 days. It would become an international news story. How did you get found? What happened?
What happened was the Libyan government tried to say they didn't know where we were, but obviously our bodies would have turned up, right? So it's like either we're dead or we're captive. After a few days, you can't keep saying you don't know where they are. In fact, on like the 4th day or the 3rd day of captivity we were brought to Tripoli. And there was a TV in the like prison apartment they put us in. And Anthony, while the government was trying to reassure us that they were not going to beat us up anymore and that they were like a legitimate government, Anthony found the remote to the TV and put it on, and it was CNN with our photos. And it's saying like the Libyan government can't ascertain the whereabouts of these journalists, which obviously was like we were sitting with the Libyan government and they knew exactly where we were. So I started crying and saying like, don't you have families? Like just let our families know we're alive. Then you could do whatever you want with us, you know? And so there was a lot of international pressure. You know, we were 4 New York Times journalists. And so it was hard. Once they knew that we weren't killed, it was hard to just kind of not make an agreement or something. And so Gaddafi basically wanted to show that he was a legitimate leader, that he was not a terrorist, and that he was not going to kidnap us. So they eventually let us go.
How did you process this emotionally? How do you process being kidnapped?
You know, it's very hard for me to answer that question because I don't really know what goes on. You know, I think people are surprised that I'm still in the field, that I'm still like a happy person. I'm not dark and depressed. I'm sure I have PTSD. There's no way I don't. But I am generally like a very happy, well-adjusted person who sleeps great at night, you know? So I think, I don't know how I process it. I think for me, talking about things helps a lot. I have an incredible family, both sort of Paul and the kids, but also my sisters and my parents. And, you know, when you come from an incredible upbringing of support and love and like empowerment, I think it helps you get through these really traumatic moments.
You're very close with your sisters, aren't you?
Very close.
You've mentioned so many times about your experience on the front line in any story that you cover, but also being kidnapped. You mention I was a woman. How has that been a superpower in terms of the spaces you get access to and the stories that you're able to tell?
First of all, I think I'm still alive because I'm a woman. You know, I think in both of those kidnappings, it could have gone a lot worse if a woman was not present. Both of those happened in places in Iraq and in Libya on the front line where traditionally women are not seen in public, you know, where they're not out and certainly not covering war and not partaking in war. And so I think it gives people pause. And so I think it's a superpower just being a woman.
And you've said before that feeling emotion isn't a weakness. And you've mentioned the emotion that comes to you in those moments. Photojournalism has been and remains a very male-dominated industry. Do you think that's changing the perception of women in the field and how women show up at work?
Look, everyone's different. I don't. It's weird. I don't work on like huge news stories anymore. So I'm actually not often shooting side by side with a pack of photographers the way I did for so many years. I'm emotional. And I know that as I get older, I'm more emotional. So I sort of feel things very profoundly. And when my subject is emotional, I sometimes get emotional. And so I think I don't try to hide that. I'm not embarrassed of it. I mean, sometimes I'm embarrassed because I get really emotional. And then I'm like, oh, maybe I need to see a therapist. But I think, you know, I think in general we're human beings and like we need to process things and we need to feel, you know, and it's kind of when I stop feeling that I need to be really worried.
When I was starting out in photography and being in the field, I was desperate to be taken seriously. So I sort of did everything to
of course,
look
we all
less
were.
like a woman. Not that I don't wear baggy clothes now, but they were baggy. And I wouldn't wear makeup. And what I loved about you is you showed and offered a different path because you retained your femininity, and you would come home, you had your heels, you would have your lipstick with you.
Yeah, but okay, so I still, when I'm home, I'm dressed like that, but still in the field, annoyingly in the field, I feel like it's my life's mission to design like super sexy cargo pants. Like one day I'm going to work with a designer.
Tomb Raider,
but it's like, you know, but I think we need certain gear for our work, and that's like big pants with big pockets and whatever, which are inevitably unflattering. But I certainly do like still try and wear eyeliner in the field or something. I get my nails done before I go to war because I want to look at my hands and be like, oh yes, you're a woman, you know, because so much of our job is like having to be tough and having to, you know, be as strong as the men, or at least trying to be as strong as we can be.
Take me on assignment with you. I mean, you mentioned in Ukraine you have a security advisor, you're working with a videographer, but often you're working alone. What have you got with you? What's the gear? Take me with you.
So I'm packing now for Ukraine, and I take 3 camera bodies, like 2 Nikons, a bunch of lenses. I have to bring a long lens. I take a fixed 35-28, a 24 to 70 2.8. I take a long lens, you know, a 70 to 200 2.8, and then I take a ton of batteries. I'll take the Leica Q3, a small point and shoot. I take a flak jacket, so a bulletproof vest, a helmet. I take a lot of medication like Cipro. You know, I take an antibiotic. I take rehydration salts. I take painkiller, all sorts of painkiller. I have back issues, so I always carry enough in case my back goes out. Cold medicine, you know, everything you might need, or like the one thing you forget is what you're going to need. So I have sort of like a bag of medicine that I take everywhere. I bring protein bars, coffee, a immersion heater to heat my own water, a coffee mug, my work boots, 1 nice pair of shoes, and a dress in case I have to go out, sneakers, running clothes, workout gear, and then I have a yoga mat in storage at the New York Times bureau in Kiev because I work out in my room wherever I am.
And that's one thing you've done religiously since the day I've known you. You're always working out. So is that a part of a way that you stay grounded? Is routine important to you?
I think so. Routine is really important to me, especially when I come home, because of course we have no routine in the field. Working out is important to me on so many levels. I think first of all, mentally, you know, psychologically, it gives me that hour a day where I can just sort of focus and kind of work through things. That's like generally cardio. I do Pilates for my back and my core just to sort of stay strong.
And it's to keep your body in check, but also your mind.
Yeah.
Trump, the media landscape seems to be changing. There's been this immense pendulum swing. Politically, things feel more divided than ever. How does that shape your approach to the work that you do? Do you feel a bigger responsibility? Does nothing change? Like, how are you feeling about how divided things are at the moment?
I definitely feel a bigger responsibility. I feel like we need to do our jobs even more than ever and do them with incredible integrity and do them well and make sure that every piece is sort of airtight with no factual errors. I believe in journalism. I believe in this job, and I think it's really important to make sure that we are all out there documenting what's happening right now. It's also our role to speak up when it feels a little bit uncomfortable. Increasingly, we live in a society where one gets punished for speaking up and one gets punished for being truthful. So I think that's happening a lot in America right now, especially with this government. I think it's a very difficult time.
How do you think photojournalism is changing? When you think about those early years, like what's different now?
The main difference is the fact that there are citizen journalists who are telling their own stories, which is incredible and extraordinary and very necessary, especially in wars like the Israel-Gaza war, because Israel is not allowing international media into Gaza and has not allowed them into Gaza since October 7th. Obviously, we need people on the ground to document what's happening.
If the borders had been open, do you think you would have been on the ground in Gaza? And how has it felt for you to watch it unfold, knowing that foreign journalists haven't been allowed in?
Of course I would have been there. I mean, I think that what's surprising to me is that most people around the world have no idea that Gaza's been closed to international media. I think I get a lot of queries like, why don't you go? And they obviously, it's like, well, Israel has not allowed any independent media, any foreign journalists in the country. What's happening there is horrific. It's very difficult. Obviously what happened on October 7th was horrible, and it was, unspeakable, the crimes that happened that day, and there were a lot of civilians that were killed and assaulted. The fact is, both sides need to be covered. Both need to be covered. And what's happening in Gaza has gone on a very long time. It's been over 2 years, and it's, children and women are dying in the tens of thousands. And now there's on the verge of famine, and people are, children are dying from malnutrition. I mean, it's very difficult to watch this unfold from the outside, because usually my tools for dealing with something like this are to go and to be, at least to document. That's sort of how I contribute to the world, and I can't do that. So it's very difficult.
I'm thinking of anyone who's wanting to become a journalist or photojournalist. What was a piece of advice that was a game changer for you that you would pass on?
If you want to do this work, you have to make a lot of sacrifices and be very focused. It's not easy. People think it's like a glamorous life being out on the front line, and it's not. It's certainly, there's a lot of it that's like, captivating and intriguing, and you're on the front lines of history, and it's fun at times. You've got a lot of camaraderie, and you've got, people that I've known for decades who I've been in very intense situations with, that we've formed a bond that rivals no other. But I also think it's hard and it's lonely.
You've kind of navigated different worlds, being on the front line, coming home, but you've also existed in spaces where there's the best and worst of humanity. What's the enduring lesson you've learned from spending time there?
I mean, I guess the enduring lesson is people are so similar all around the world. At the end of the day, we all kind of want the same things out of life.
Tell me about this documentary. National Geographic are making a film about you. I don't know what you can say.
I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this, but I will. But it's premiering at Toronto Film
amazing.
Festival. Yeah, so that's exciting. It's been 3 years in the making, essentially. They started filming me in Ukraine. And Andrei, he did all of the Ukraine footage. So it's essentially a portrait of a mother who goes to war.
Who's directing it?
Chai Vasarhelyi and Jimmy Chin. Yeah. And so they did Free Solo. I mean, they're incredible, obviously.
They're absolute legends. It's amazing. And I'm so happy that someone is telling this story, but also you're really in good hands with them. They've told some of the most incredible stories and really made amazing films. Yeah,
they are incredible filmmakers. So we'll see. I'm nervous, obviously, because I completely, I didn't try to censor anything. I just allowed them.
So they have full editorial control.
Yeah,
amazing.
I have zero control over anything.
Okay, final question. Who is a visionary to you, and what does that word even mean to you?
People who fight for equality and freedom, people who risk their own lives to create and document a better world, people who open doors rather than close them, people who unite people, help people. I don't think it's one person. I think it's a series of people who I'm constantly sort of admiring or referencing, but it's very hard to put it into one person.
I'll take that answer. It was brilliant.
Oh, good. Thank God.
Thank you, Lynsey.
Thank you, Alice.
So much for your time and just for being a role model to me, but also so many other people across the world. Thank you.
Thank you.